1950, Ron was lecturing on both coasts. They rented the Shrine Auditorium out here and filled it with 6,500 people. There were supposed to be 500 Dianetics groups across the country, and 500 people were taking the course for $500. But in 1950, he became estranged from his wife, and the Elizabeth Foundation, so recently formed, was already falling apart. Two pre-clears had had psychotic breaks. The medical doctor that was part of the organization resigned, and so did others. Money was pouring in. Money was pouring out, but there was no accounting for it. In 1959, Ron spent several months in Cuba. He and his wife were engaged in a bitter custody battle over their daughter Alexis. And finally, Sarah agreed to allow him to have a divorce. Things were very bad financially with both of the organizations, but in April, a knight in shining white armor rushed to Ron's rescue by the name of Don Purcell, and he flew him from Cuba to Wichita, Kansas. And Ron began lecturing in Kansas. Purcell worked hard and was able to get the debts cleaned up, and he thought he was doing very well. All of a sudden, courts found that the new Dianetics, or the new Hubbard Foundation in Kansas, was responsible for the debts of the old one. So although Purcell had done all kinds of things, suddenly he was back in the red again. And Purcell and Hubbard had many other arguments. By this time, Ron was talking about past lives, and Purcell didn't like that idea. And early in 1952, they split. Hubbard was married again and had formed the Hubbard Association of Scientologists, exclusively under his control. And he took his new wife, Mary Sue Hubbard, Mary Sue Whipp, she was, to Phoenix. And they developed a new philosophy called Scientology. Scio was the Latin for knowing. Logos was from the Greek to study. At this time in 1952, Scientology didn't have secrets. Its doctrine was open and readily available. And in 1952, Ron wrote a book called Scientology, The History of Man. It begins by saying, quote, "This is a cold-blooded and factual account of your last 60 trillion years." Not pretentious. In it, he explained that the true self of the individual was immortal, omniscient, and omnipotent. And that was the Thetan. The Thetan took many, many bodies over the trillions and trillions of years and lived in many, many universes. By this time, they had the E-meter, developed by Volney Matheson, and Hubbard claimed that the E-meter confirmed past lives. In this book, he said that the Thetans only came to Earth 35,000 years ago, and it was only to help out the poor old cavemen. And we got engrams from clams, from opening and closing, and we got other engrams from those things that pumped water, and we got a falling out of tree engram from the sloth, and we got biting problem engrams from the Piltdown man. What Ron had discovered was put very well in 1973 by Christopher Evans. Evans said, "For those interested, the real secret of the universe is as follows. In the beginning are the Thetans. These are omnipotent, indestructible beings who suffer from being immortal. The reason they suffer is because immortality, when one has nothing to do, becomes intolerably boring. There are, it is true, other Thetans about, but since they too do nothing, it's just as boring as if there were only one. Now, in order to help while away eternity, they decided to go and play some games. These consist, in the first instance, of creating universes of one kind and another, and playing with them. The games could be of any kind. After a while, this too becomes boring, and the Thetans realize that their omnipotence and omniscience is the real trouble. With a masterstroke, they decide voluntarily to handicap themselves, limiting their powers and cutting down on their range of knowledge. The game becomes more interesting. The Thetans enter into it with greater enthusiasm. Then, something begins to happen. Slowly but surely, the laws of the universe they have created out of matter, energy, space, and time, or as Ron said, MEST, begin to snare them. They become more and more immersed in the game, less and less concerned about their true status as Thetans. Slowly, they become more hopelessly trapped in the material universe, reaching their present state many millions of years ago. Nowadays, the Thetans have forgotten what they really are and go around thinking they really are bodies. They have even forgotten that they're playing a game at all. Welcome to Scientology.